My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. 6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom facing my own parents. They were suing me, their daughter, to force me to sell my home and give the entire proceeds to my sister to fund her divorce. They thought they held all the cards, that I would fold just like I always had. But they didn't know about the secret buried in the very walls of that house. A secret my grandfather left behind to protect me. The verdict that day didn't just shock them. It shattered the delusion our family had been living in for 30 years. If you're watching this, drop a comment and let me know where you're from. And if you've ever felt like you were the only responsible one in your family, hit that like and subscribe button. My story might sound terrifyingly familiar. My life, until recently, could be summed up in one word: stable. I'm an architect. I'm not flashy, but I'm good at what I do. I find joy in taking chaotic spaces and turning them into orderly, beautiful homes. Maybe it's my way of coping with the chaos that has always defined my own family. I live in a modest craftsman bungalow in the Portland suburbs, a house that smells of pine wood and old books. It is my sanctuary, my refuge, and the only inheritance I ever received from my late grandfather, Arthur. In my family, there were two types of daughters: the golden child and the responsible one. My sister, Chloe, was solid gold. 4 years younger than me, Chloe was a whirlwind of impulse and charm. Everything came easily to her friends, attention, and most importantly, our parents' unending forgiveness. When Chloe dropped out of college after 1 year because she needed to find herself, my parents funded her 3-month trip to Europe. When I worked 3 jobs to put myself through architecture school, they told me it was building character. Oh, this injustice wasn't a single event. It was the air we breathed. I remember when I was 25, fresh out of school and drowning in student debt, I'd managed to save $5,000 for a down payment on a reliable used car. One night, Chloe called me, sobbing. She'd bought a flashy sports car with a high-interest loan and gotten into a minor fender bender. She needed $4,000 for the repairs before the insurance company found out and hiked her rates to an impossible level. "You have to help me, Clara," she wept. "Mom and Dad will kill me." Of course, I gave her the money. My parents later praised me for being there for my sister. Chloe promised she'd pay me back every penny. 6 months later, I saw her posting photos from a resort in Mexico, showing off a new designer handbag. When I asked about the money, she scoffed and said, "Oh, you're so serious. Family is supposed to help each other out, right?" My parents took her side, telling me I shouldn't keep score with my sister. I took the bus for another year. That was the pattern. Clara will fix it. Clara will provide. Clara is the safety net. When Chloe decided she wanted to be an influencer and needed a new camera and laptop, my parents loaned her the money from their retirement fund. When that business venture failed within months, it was me who helped them cover an unexpected medical bill because they were short on cash. They viewed my stability not as a product of my hard work, but as a communal family resource. The house was the only thing that was truly mine. My grandfather Arthur saw all of this. He was an engineer, a quiet, methodical man who believed in blueprints and solid foundations. He used to tell me, "Clara, you've got good framing. Don't ever let anyone weaken your foundation." When he passed away 5 years ago, he left the house to me in his will. My parents and Chloe were stunned. They had expected it to be sold and the profits split. "That's not fair," Chloe had pouted at the will reading. "Why does Clara get a whole house?" At the time, I didn't understand the full weight of his actions. I was just grateful to have a place that belonged to me, a place where I wasn't someone's backup plan. The house was more than bricks and mortar. It was the final validation from the one person who seemed to truly see me. I spent the next 5 years making it my own, renovating the kitchen, planting a vegetable garden in the backyard, and turning the attic into my design studio. It was where I was building my life, one plank at a time. I thought owning the house would create a clear boundary, a statement of my independence. But I was wrong. To my family, my house wasn't a fortress of my independence. It was simply the largest, untapped asset in their arsenal. I thought I could weather the low-grade injustice, the constant undercurrent of criticism, and the perpetual financial requests. But I had no idea a storm was coming, a storm that would threaten to destroy not just my home, but my very sense of self, and force me to confront the truth of my family once and for all. The storm arrived in the form of Mark, Chloe's husband. Mark was a decent guy, a level-headed accountant who seemed to keep Chloe's most chaotic aspects in check. They'd been married for 3 years, in a lavish wedding that my parents had drained their retirement savings to afford. I had always wondered how someone so grounded could put up with Chloe's constant drama, but I figured love had its reasons. The unraveling began on a Tuesday night. I was working late in my studio, finishing up blueprints for a client, when my phone rang. It was Chloe, her voice frantic and incoherent. "He left me," she wailed. "He just packed a bag and left. He said he can't take it anymore." I sighed, bracing myself for a night of consolation and drama. This wasn't the first time. Chloe and Mark had explosive fights before, which usually ended with Chloe camping out at my place for a few hours before they would dramatically make up. "Okay, where are you?" I asked. "I'm on my way to your place," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I need somewhere to stay." When she arrived, she was a wreck. Makeup was streaked down her face, her hair was a mess, and she was clutching a Louis Vuitton suitcase I knew she couldn't afford. She fell into my arms, crying about how Mark had become so cold and distant. My parents arrived shortly after, summoned by Chloe before she had even called me. They swooped in, circling Chloe as if she were a fragile victim of an unspeakable tragedy. My father, David, paced my living room, muttering about having a talk with Mark. My mother, Susan, was making Chloe tea and rubbing her back. Shooting me looks as if my composure was a form of betrayal. "What was it about this time?" I asked gently, once Chloe had calmed down a bit. She looked away. "We've just grown apart. He doesn't get me." But a few days later, the real story emerged. Not from Chloe, but from Mark himself. He called me, his voice weary and resolved. "Clara, I'm sorry to drag you into this," he said, "but I think you should know the truth. I didn't just leave. I found out Chloe has been having an affair for the last 6 months. With her personal trainer." He paused, and I could hear the raw pain in his voice. "And she's maxed out our joint savings on things for him. A Rolex, a trip to Cabo. I'm done." I filed for divorce. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't just a fight, it was a complete betrayal. When I confronted Chloe about it, she didn't even bother to deny it. "Mark was just so boring," she said with a shrug, as if discussing the weather. "He never wanted to do anything fun. I deserved to be happy." That attitude set the stage for what was to come. The divorce quickly turned ugly. Mark, the meticulous accountant, had receipts for everything. Credit card statements, emails, text messages. His lawyer made it clear, because of Chloe's infidelity and dissipation of marital assets, she wasn't going to get much. Mark would keep the house, which he'd bought before the marriage, and Chloe would be left with the debts she had accrued. This was the catalyst that blew my family apart. For my parents, the truth didn't matter. Their golden daughter was under attack, and they would do anything to protect her. Chloe's failure wasn't a result of her choices. It was a family tragedy to be solved. And when they looked around for a solution, their eyes didn't land on Chloe's mistakes or their own financial limitations. Their eyes landed on me and on my house. It was a Sunday evening when they floated the idea. Chloe had been living with me for nearly a month, turning my guest room into a swamp of designer clothes and tabloid magazines. My parents came over for dinner, carrying an air of feigned solemnity. We sat around my dining table, and my father cleared his throat. "Clara," he began, "we need to talk about Chloe's situation. She needs a fresh start," my mother added. "A place of her own, some capital to get back on her feet." I nodded. "I understand. I've been looking at some rental apartments in the area she could probably afford if she gets a job." They exchanged a look. "It's more complicated than that," my father said. "Mark's lawyer is pushing for a settlement. Chloe has to pay back a portion of the money she spent. We're talking nearly $50,000. $50,000? I was stunned. "How is she going to pay that?" "That's just it," my mother said, her voice dropping dangerously low. "She can't. Not on her own, but we can. As a family." Oh, and then she said it. The simple, casual sentence that changed everything. "Clara, honey, we've been thinking. Your house has appreciated so much since Grandpa passed. If you sell it, there would be more than enough to pay off Mark, get Chloe a down payment on a nice condo, and even leave a little something for you to start over with." I stared at them, certain I had misheard. "Sell my house? Sell Grandpa's house? It's the most logical solution," my father said, his voice devoid of any hesitation. "It's a major asset just sitting there. It's time it did some work for the family." I felt the air leave my lungs. They weren't joking. They had discussed this. They had planned this. My sanctuary, my heritage, was, in their eyes, just a solution to Chloe's latest problem. Their gazes turned on me, not with sympathy, but with calculation. I was no longer their daughter. I was their solution. And their solution had a price I couldn't possibly imagine paying. The storm had arrived, and it was threatening to wash away the very foundation of my life. My initial reaction was one of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. I tried to explain, logically and calmly, why their request was beyond unreasonable. "This is my home," I said, my voice trembling. "It's where I live. It's my professional studio. Grandpa wanted me to have it." "Your grandfather would want you to help your sister," my mother shot back instantly, weaponizing his memory. "Family comes first, Clara. He always said that. Family helps each other, yes," I countered, "but not by setting themselves on fire. Selling my house would make me homeless and destroy my business." Chloe, who had been silent until then, burst into her familiar crocodile tears. "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she sobbed. "My life is falling apart, and all you care about are your stupid walls. I always knew you were jealous of me." The conversation ended there, with me cast as the selfish, heartless villain. But it was only the first shot in what became a weeks-long campaign of pressure. They turned my home into a battlefield. My parents started showing up unannounced, bearing passive-aggressive comments about how I was living. "This house is just so large for one person," my mother would say, looking around my living room. "Such a waste of space." My father would point out minor, needed repairs. "That roof looks like it's seen better days, Clara." The upkeep on a place like this must be draining. Chloe, still living with me, became unbearable. She began treating me as her personal maid. She left dirty dishes in the sink for days, invited friends over without asking me, and commandeered the living room with her loud reality television shows. One afternoon, I came home to find she had taken it upon herself to paint an accent wall in the guest room, a shocking shade of Pepto-Bismol pink. "It needed a pop of color," she announced. "Your gray is so depressing." When I told her she had no right to alter my home, she called my mother, and I was subjected to a 20-minute lecture on being inflexible and creating a hostile environment for my poor, struggling sister. The escalation continued. A week later, my parents arrived with a real estate agent in tow. "Just exploring our options, honey," my mother said with a bright, false smile. "Mrs. Henderson here was just going to take a look and give us an estimate. No strings attached." I stood in stunned silence as this woman I'd never met walked through my home, my grandfather's home, discussing its resale potential and minor staging changes that could increase its value, while my parents nodded along. I felt like a ghost in my own house. My attempts to talk sense into them failed spectacularly. Every time I tried to set a boundary, "Chloe, you can't have friends sleep over without asking me," it would devolve into a massive fight, culminating in my parents taking her side. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Clara," my father would say. "She's going through a divorce. Show a little compassion." My compassion was running on fumes, replaced by a simmering rage. They weren't just asking for my assets. They were invading my life, my sanity, and trying to gaslight me into believing my resistance was a character flaw. The wake-up call came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch with an old colleague, David, a wise older architect who had been a mentor to me. I hadn't intended to unload on him, but he saw the strain on my face and asked gently what was wrong. Before I knew it, the whole story was pouring out of me: Chloe's divorce, the demand to sell the house, the invasion of my space. He listened patiently, without judgment. When I was finished, he set down his coffee mug and looked me straight in the eye. "Clara," he said softly, "this isn't about helping your sister. This is a hostile takeover. They are trying to liquidate your life because your sister blew up her own." He paused, letting his words sink in. "They don't see you. They see a solution. And they will not stop until they either get what they want or you make them stop." Hearing it from an outsider, stated so plainly and without emotion, was like a lightning bolt. He was right. I had been so deep in the fog of their manipulation and guilt-tripping that I'd started to believe their narrative that I was the selfish one, that I was being unreasonable. David gave me an invaluable gift: validation. My feelings were real. The situation was as toxic as I felt it was. I returned home that afternoon with a new sense of resolve. My rage was no longer simmering. It was a cold, focused flame. I walked into the guest room and stared at the hideous pink wall. It wasn't just paint. It was a symbol of their disrespect, of the way they saw my life as a blank canvas for them to paint their own desires upon. That night, I called Chloe and my parents into the living room. "This is ending," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Chloe, you need to find another place to live. Mom, Dad, I'm not selling this house. The discussion is over." They looked at me as if I had grown a second head. My defiance had caught them off guard. But their surprise quickly curdled into anger. "Unbelievable," my father snarled. "After everything we've done for you." "You're kicking me out?" Chloe shrieked. "You're a monster." The fight was ugly, maybe the worst we'd ever had. But this time, something was different. I didn't back down. I didn't apologize. I simply repeated my boundary. Eventually, they stormed out in a fury, Chloe to her room to slam the door, and my parents out of the house, throwing back vague threats about how I would live to regret this. When the house fell silent, I stood alone in my living room, my heart pounding. I was scared, but I also felt a powerful sense of freedom. I had drawn a line in the sand. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought that after I'd stood up for myself, they would back off. But David's words echoed in my head. They will not stop until you make them stop. I had no idea how prophetic his words would be. What they did next went beyond manipulation and pressure. It entered a new realm entirely, one that would land all of us in a place I never imagined. A courtroom. After our confrontation, an eerie quiet settled over the house. Chloe barely spoke to me, communicating only in clipped texts or resentful glares as we passed in the hallway. My parents stopped coming over. Instead, they began a telephone campaign, calling me at all hours of the day to plead, persuade, or guilt-trip me. "You're breaking my heart, Clara," my mother would say. "Our family is falling apart, and it's all because of a building." I held firm, repeating my mantra, "I am not selling the house." I thought my persistence would eventually wear them down, but I had underestimated their desperation, or perhaps Chloe's ruthlessness. The final straw wasn't a loud explosion, but a single piece of white plastic staked into my front lawn. It was a Wednesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the blow-up. I was coming home from a long client meeting, exhausted and just wanting to unwind with a cup of tea in my garden. As I walked up my porch steps, I saw it. A bright, plastic, "For Sale" sign planted firmly in my front yard. It bore the name of the real estate agent my parents had brought over, Mrs. Henderson, and her phone number. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was more than a violation, it was a declaration. They were no longer asking. They were acting, moving forward as if my decision didn't exist. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I tore the sign from the ground, hot anger surging through me. I stormed into the house, ready to confront Chloe. "What is this?" I yelled, brandishing the sign. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, painting her toenails, and she didn't even bother to look up. "Oh, that," she said airily. "Mom and Dad thought we should be proactive. It's a seller's market." "We?" "There is no we, Chloe. This is my house. You and Mom and Dad have no right to do this." "Oh, why?" She finally looked up, a smirk playing on her lips. "Actually, we do. They spoke to a lawyer. He said that because Grandpa basically raised Dad and his sister, and because Dad helped care for him in his final years, they might have a legal claim to the house as dependents. They called it something about a moral obligation." I stared at her, disbelief warring with rage. Moral obligation? Dad visited him once a month. I was the one who was there every day after school. "Oh, details, details," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "The point is, we're taking it to court. We're going to ask a judge to order the sale of the house so the assets can be distributed fairly. The lawyer says we have a very strong case." In that moment, everything shattered. The entire history of my family, the favoritism, the exploitation, the complete disregard for me as a human being crystallized in this one calculated, cruel act. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were trying to erase my relationship with my grandfather, to turn his legacy into a tool to solve their self-inflicted problems. They were suing me. My own parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had joined forces with my sister to sue me, to take away the one thing in this world that was truly mine. It was the ultimate betrayal. There was no more room for doubt or hesitation. The cold flame of anger inside me hardened into steel. I looked at Chloe, who had gone back to her toenails as if she'd just announced we were out of milk, and I felt a terrifying clarity. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low and even. She scoffed. "You can't kick me out. This is practically my house now anyway. Get out. Now." I walked to the front door and pulled it wide open. "I'm calling the police if you're not gone in 5 minutes. For the first time, her smirk wavered. She saw something in my eyes she'd never seen before. Not hurt, not explosive anger, but an immovable finality. She muttered something about me being insane and began to haphazardly throw her things into her suitcases, cursing me over the phone to my mother as she did. 10 minutes later, she was gone, having called an Uber. When the door closed behind her, the house was completely silent. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence before a battle. I stood in the middle of my living room, feeling hollowed out and strangely powerful. They had pushed me too far. They had underestimated me for the last time. They thought they knew every angle, every weakness. They thought they had a strong case, but they didn't know about the real foundation of this house. They didn't know the secrets my grandfather had built into its very framework. They had started a war, and now I was going to end it. After the initial shock subsided, the panic was gone. In its place, a strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of someone who could finally see the path ahead, even if it was paved with the rubble of her family. I spent that evening sitting in my grandfather's old armchair, the worn leather one with a permanent indent where he used to sit, and I remembered. I remembered the day his lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, had come to the house after the funeral to go over the paperwork. My parents had been there, expecting a discussion about selling the property. Instead, Mr. Caldwell had handed me a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Your grandfather was very specific about his wishes, Clara," he had said, his eyes kind but firm. "He wanted to make sure you were protected. Read these documents carefully. They're more important than you think." At the time, I was too deep in grief to fully register his meaning. I'd put the portfolio away and all but forgotten about it. But now, his words echoed in my mind. He wanted to make sure you were protected. I went up to the attic, to an old wooden chest where I kept his mementos. At the bottom, under photo albums and his old engineering blueprints, was the portfolio. I brushed the dust off and carried it down to the living room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the clasp. Inside wasn't just the will and the deed to the house. There was another document, professionally bound, titled The Arthur Gable Irrevocable Trust. I spent the next 2 hours reading, page by painstaking page. My grandfather, an engineer to his core, had constructed a legal fortress around this house. He hadn't just left it to me. He had placed it in an irrevocable trust. The legalese was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. The trust stipulated that I, Clara, was the sole beneficiary and trustee. I had the right to live in the house, rent-free, for the rest of my life. The house could not be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral for any purpose, unless I became permanently incapacitated or passed away. Most importantly, there was a clause, highlighted and underlined, that seemed written specifically for my current situation. The Dynasty Clause, he'd called it. It explicitly stated that the house and any assets from it could never be used to settle the debts, lawsuits, or financial obligations of any other family member, including my parents and my sister. It was my secret weapon. My grandfather had seen this coming. He had known his family. He had known my kindness could be exploited. and he had built a legal firewall to protect me. But there was one more thing in the portfolio. At the very bottom, there was a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written in his strong, slanted handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a 10-page letter. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are facing a challenge concerning this house. I am sorry I cannot be there to see you through it, but I have tried to leave you the tools to fight for yourself." The rest of the letter was a heartbreaking indictment of what he had observed for years. He wrote about how my parents had always dismissed my independence while enabling Chloe's irresponsibility. He documented times they had asked to borrow money from him to help Chloe out, times they had complained about my stubbornness when I refused to give up on my dreams. "They are good people, but they are weak," he wrote. "They love you in their way, but they have never understood your strength. They see Chloe and see a project to be fixed. They look at you and see a finished solution. This house is not a gift, Clara. It is an acknowledgement. It is recognition for everything you have built for yourself. Do not let them take it from you. Use the trust. It was built to be ironclad." Tears streamed down my face as I read. It was the validation I had craved my entire life. He hadn't just given me a house. He had given me permission to defend it. The next morning, I called Mr. Caldwell. After I explained the situation, the for sale sign, the lawsuit, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I was hoping this day would never come," he finally said, his voice weary. Arthur worried about something like this. "All right, Clara, here is what we are going to do." His plan was simple and brutal. We would not reveal the existence of the trust. We would let them proceed with the lawsuit. We would let them hire their lawyer, file their motions, and make their case before the judge. They would build their entire strategy on a false premise that the house was a divisible asset. "Let them dig their own hole," Mr. Caldwell said, and I could hear a hint of steel in his voice. "Then, in court, we're going to fill that hole in, with them in it." Over the next few weeks, I followed his instructions to the letter. I retained a lawyer he recommended, a sharp woman named Miss Davis who specialized in trust and estate law. I quietly accepted the court summons. I didn't respond to my parents or my sister, though they left increasingly angry messages. "You're ignoring us, Clara. This is only going to make it worse for you in court," my father yelled into my voicemail. I let them believe I was scared and isolated. I let them believe they were in control. Meanwhile, Miss Davis and I prepared for battle. We had the trust documents certified, got a sworn affidavit from Miss Caldwell about my grandfather's intent, and even had my grandfather's letter prepared as an exhibit to establish his state of mind when he created the trust. A part of me felt a pang of guilt, that I was deceiving them, that I was setting them up for a fall. But then I remembered the for sale sign on my lawn, the smirk on Chloe's face, and my grandfather's words. "Do not let them take it from you. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. It was about defending the legacy of the one man who had ever defended me." I had one shot to turn the tables, and I wasn't going to fail. The court date arrived on a dreary, gray November morning that perfectly matched my mood. I hadn't slept much the night before, anxiety and resolve warring within me. As I walked into the courthouse, an old, imposing marble building, I felt small and alone. But then I saw my lawyer, Miss Davis, waiting for me on the steps, her briefcase tucked firmly under her arm. She gave me a short, reassuring nod. "Ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath. Ready. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. My parents and Chloe were already there, sitting at the opposing table with their lawyer, a slick-looking man named Mr. Garrett. They looked confident. My father was in a suit, my mother in her best dress, and Chloe was attempting to look sad and victimized, dabbing at her eyes periodically with a tissue. When they saw me, they looked away, their faces hardening. The judge, an older woman named Judge Miller, entered, and we all rose. She had a stern, no-nonsense air about her, and I felt a flicker of hope that she would see through my family's drama. Mr. Garrett began. He wove an emotional tale of a family in crisis. He painted Chloe as a young woman devastated by a bitter divorce, needing her family's help to get back on her feet. He painted my parents as loving, concerned parents who only wanted what was best for both their daughters. Then he turned to me. He painted me as the fortunate daughter who had been gifted a valuable asset and was now selfishly hoarding it in her family's time of need. Your Honor, Mr. Garrett concluded, we are not asking for anything unreasonable. We are simply asking this court to recognize the moral and financial claim that the plaintiff, Mr. David Miller, has to the estate left by his father. We ask that the court order the sale of the home and a fair distribution of the proceeds among the family to allow Miss Chloe Miller the fresh start she so desperately needs. Judge Miller listened intently, scribbling notes on a legal pad. Then she turned to our table. Miss Davis, she said, your response? Miss Davis rose, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Mr. Garrett's theatrics. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear and precise. The story opposing counsel has just told is very moving. It does, however, have one fundamental flaw. It is entirely irrelevant, and it's based on a completely false premise. Mr. Garrett snorted. False? The false premise is that the defendant believes she can ignore the needs of her family. Miss Davis gave a cool smile. No, counsel. The false premise is that you and your clients believe the house at 123 Oak Street is an asset that can be ordered sold by this court. It is not. She paused, letting the silence hang in the room. I could see my parents and Chloe exchange confused glances. Judge Miller raised an eyebrow. Explain. Counsel. Gladly, Your Honor. Miss Davis produced a document from her briefcase. When Mr. Arthur Gable passed away, he did not simply leave the house to his granddaughter, my client. He, being a meticulous engineer and planner, took steps to protect his legacy and his granddaughter. He established the Arthur Gable Irrevocable Trust. She handed a copy of the trust document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. As you will see, this trust explicitly names my client, Miss Clara Miller, as the sole beneficiary and trustee. It gives her the right to live in the property for her entire life. But, and this is the crucial point, it also explicitly removes her right to sell, mortgage, or otherwise encumber the property for the financial gain of any third party, especially other family members. She turned a page. If Your Honor would please look at Section 4, subsection B, the Dynasty Clause, you will find that the settler anticipated this exact type of situation and expressly forbade it. The house is, legally speaking, untouchable. It is not a marital asset. It is not a divisible family asset. It is a legal fortress. This entire lawsuit is, therefore, moot. The silence in the courtroom was stunning. I glanced at the other table. The color had drained from my father's face. My mother was staring into the middle distance, her mouth slightly agape. Chloe looked as though she had been slapped. Their lawyer, Mr. Garrett, was scrambling through his papers, his face flushing with a mixture of confusion and anger. He had been completely outmaneuvered. This is a surprise, Your Honor, Mr. Garrett stammered. We were not made aware of this document. Perhaps that's because you didn't do your due diligence, Judge Miller said dryly, her eyes scanning the trust. This seems rather ironclad, Miss Davis. It is, Your Honor. And if there were any doubt as to the settler's intent, Miss Davis continued, pulling out one last weapon, we also have a personal letter written by Mr. Gable to my client, explaining exactly why he created this trust to protect her from the very kind of financial predation the plaintiffs have exhibited. It was the final blow. Judge Miller skimmed the copy of the letter, her expression growing more severe by the second. After a long moment of silence, she set it down and looked directly at my parents and Chloe. I have seen a great many family disputes in this courtroom, she said, her voice like ice. But rarely have I seen one so brazen and malicious. You have sued your daughter and sister to take her home from her, to solve a problem of your own irresponsible making. You have done this to the woman your father and grandfather went to such great lengths to protect. It is disgraceful. She brought her gavel down with a sharp crack. This case is dismissed with prejudice. That means you can never bring it to court again. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay the defendants full legal costs. This court is adjourned. And that was it. It was that simple. As the judge left, I just sat there, the air finally returning to my lungs. Miss Davis patted my shoulder. We won, she whispered. I looked over at the other table. My mother was crying silently. My father just sat, staring at the table, a defeated man. And Chloe was looking at me. For once, there was no smirk, no defiance, just empty disbelief. She was used to always having a way out, always having a safety net. This time, the hole they dug was too deep, and my grandfather had made sure there was no way out. As we left the courtroom, a cold drizzle had begun to fall, matching the somber mood of my family. They huddled in a small group on the courthouse steps, seeming unsure of where to go or what to do. My father tried to catch my eye, but I just looked away and kept walking beside Miss Davis. There was nothing left to say. A judge had said it all. The drive home was surreal. I had expected to feel a sense of elation, of victory. Instead, I felt a profound emptiness. I had won the battle, but I had lost my family in the process. Or maybe, the truth was, I had lost them long ago, and today was simply the day the death certificate was signed. When I got home to my home, undeniably and permanently, I did the first thing a person with a newfound sense of boundaries should do. I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed. As the locksmith worked, I walked through the rooms, feeling like a stranger in my own space. The Pepto-Bismol pink wall in the guest room seemed to mock me. The remnants of Chloe's occupation were everywhere. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dragged a ladder up from the basement, found the cans of pale gray paint I had originally used, and I began to repaint the offending wall. Every brushstroke was deliberate. Every motion was an act of reclamation. I painted through the night, stopping only for tea, until every trace of the pink was gone, erased beneath a coat of soothing, peaceful gray. As the sun came up, I stood back, exhausted but satisfied. The house was mine again. The new dawn wasn't just about paint. It was about creating new rules. I blocked my parents' and sisters' numbers on my phone. I knew they would try to reach out, to attempt either a half-hearted apology or a continuation of the blame game. I wasn't ready for either. I needed space. I needed silence. The first few weeks were hard. The silence in the house was sometimes deafening. I'd find myself habitually about to tell my mom about my workday, or start to call Chloe to share a stupid joke. before I remembered. But underneath the sadness was a growing sense of relief. No more walking on eggshells. No more surprise financial demands. No more constant, low-grade guilt. Just peace. I poured my energy into my work and my home. I took on a challenging new project, designing a community library. I weeded my grandfather's garden and planted tulips and daffodils for the spring. I turned the guest room, the former center of so much tension, into my own art studio, setting up an easel by the window where the light was best. I heard news of my family through the grapevine of other relatives. Chloe, without a settlement, had been forced to accept Mark's harsh terms. She'd had to sell her sports car and move into a small, shabby apartment on the other side of town. She'd had to get a job, working as a bartender, a humiliation for someone who had always prided herself on not having to work. My parents had to pay my legal fees, a significant sum that wiped out a large portion of their savings. They were facing the direct consequences of their actions, perhaps for the first time in their lives. A month after the court date, I received a handwritten letter in my mailbox. It was from my mother. It wasn't filled with the accusations I expected. Instead, it was short and tear-stained. "Clara," it read, "your father and I don't know what to say. We were wrong. We were wrong about everything. I hope someday you can forgive us. I miss you." I read the letter several times. A part of me wanted to call her immediately, to fall back into the familiarity of my old role. But the stronger part of me, the part that had been forged by my grandfather's wisdom and the fire of the courtroom, knew it was too soon. Healing takes time, and trust, once so completely broken, has to be rebuilt from the foundation up. I folded the letter and put it in the leather portfolio with the trust documents. It was a start, but my new dawn was just beginning, and I wasn't going to let the shadows creep back in too soon. 10 months can feel like a lifetime. 10 months after the court's verdict, I was standing in the newly built community library I had designed. Sunlight streamed through the high windows I'd sketched, illuminating rows of books and children curled up in colorful beanbag chairs, lost in stories. The mayor had just cut the ceremonial ribbon, and in his speech, he'd called my design a gift to the city. Looking around the bright, peaceful space, I felt a deep, quiet pride, a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. My career had taken off after the library project. The recognition brought new clients, more interesting projects, and for the first time, I hired an assistant to help manage my growing workload. The business I had built in my attic studio wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. My personal life had found a new equilibrium, too. The peace that came from setting firm boundaries had allowed me to breathe. I joined a hiking club and spent my weekends exploring the trails of Oregon. I took up pottery, finding a simple joy in creating something beautiful out of a lump of clay. My house was no longer a fortress to be defended. It had become my sanctuary again, filled with friends, laughter, and the smell of freshly baked banana bread. My relationship with my family had evolved radically. After months of silence, I agreed to meet my parents at a neutral ground coffee shop. The conversation was awkward and full of long pauses, but this time, there were no accusations or manipulations, just a quiet, repentant sadness on their part. "We didn't see you," my father admitted, staring into his coffee. "We were so focused on putting out Chloe's fires that we took your stability for granted. We used it as a resource, instead of celebrating it as an achievement." My mother, who had lost weight and had new worry lines etched around her eyes, added, "I reread your father's letter. He was right about everything. We were weak, and I am so sorry, Clara. Sorry for not being the mother you deserved. It was a start. We began to rebuild, but on new terms. Our relationship was now defined by boundaries. We met for dinner every couple of weeks. We didn't talk about money. They no longer offered unsolicited advice. They were learning to treat me as an independent adult, not a solution to their problems. Chloe's fate was a cautionary tale. Without a financial rescue, she'd been forced to face reality. The bartending job didn't last. She drifted through a series of minimum wage retail jobs, constantly complaining about her bosses and coworkers. Her shabby apartment was a constant reminder of what she had lost. We barely spoke, aside from polite happy birthday texts. About 8 months after the court case, she called me for the first time. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual bravado. "I'm in a 12-step program," she said, for people with shopping addictions and drama-seeking behaviors. She paused. "One of the steps is making amends. You're the first person on my list. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything." I listened, and for the first time I believed she might be sincere. I told her I appreciated the call, but that forgiveness was a process. "Focus on fixing yourself first, Chloe," I told her. "That's the most important thing." Justice, I had learned, isn't always a thunderclap from a judge's gavel. Sometimes it's the slow, grinding process of characters having to live with the consequences of their choices. My parents were facing a diminished retirement and a strained relationship with both their daughters. Chloe was facing a life she had never prepared for one without a safety net. And me? I had my peace. I had my respect. I had my home. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, I found a box of my grandfather's old blueprints. One of them was the original design for this very house. In the bottom corner, in his neat engineering script, he had written a note: "A sound foundation withstands any storm." I smiled. He had left me more than a house. He had left me a blueprint for life, one based on strength, integrity, and the importance of building something that would last. And finally, I was living up to the design. As I sit in my garden now, 10 months later, I often think about the journey that brought me here. The rage, the betrayal, the cold silence of the courtroom, it all feels distant. But the lessons remain, sharp and indelible. The biggest lesson I learned was about the nature of home. For years, I thought home was a physical place, a shelter from the world. But this house, my grandfather's house, taught me that home is really a foundation of self-respect. It's a place where your boundaries are honored, where your worth is recognized, and where you can be unapologetically yourself. Sometimes, to protect that home, you have to be willing to close the door on people who threaten to weaken its foundation, even when those people share your blood. I learned that strength isn't always about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it's quiet preparation, strategic patience, and the courage to let people reveal their true colors. My grandfather taught me that. He didn't solve my problem for me. He empowered me with the tools to solve it myself. That is the ultimate gift of love and respect. My family and I are on a long, uncertain road. Perhaps one day, we will rebuild something meaningful, but it will never be the same, and that's a good thing. Because what we had before wasn't healthy. It was built on a fractured foundation of favoritism and enablement. Now, whatever we build, it will have to be built on truth. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary to protect your own peace? How did you navigate a situation where standing up for yourself meant risking an important relationship? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of overcoming family challenges. And remember to share this with someone who might need to be reminded that their worth is non-negotiable and that their home, whether physical or spiritual, is worth defending at all costs. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the strength to protect your own foundation.